Investors, with their trillions in assets, literally have the power to make or break the future. They also have a profound moral obligation to use their power of the purse in protest to an industry that insists that it will continue to grow for decades to come at precisely the moment that the science insists it must wind down. But the industry's continued growth is only possible if somebody pays for it. And today, institutional investors around the world are saying, no, climate change will not happen on my dime. What began as a moral call on US college campuses in 2011 is now a full-blown social and financial movement mobilizing trillions in service to the clean energy transition. This year, national and local governments have really emerged as standard bearers for the divestment movement. In July, Ireland became the first country in the world to divest. When the call of a grassroots campaign becomes the policy of nations, you know that a paradigm shift has occurred. In January, New York City committed to divest its nearly $200 billion pension fund from coal, oil, and gas. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has since followed suit, calling on the state pension fund to divest. This proposal is now being weighed by a special task force, and we encourage that task force to make the right decision. Last Thursday, US Senator Jeff Merkley introduced legislation that would begin the process of divesting federal pensions. And just this morning, the world's financial heartbeats, New York City and London, threw their weight behind a brand new DivestInvest Cities Forum, which will work with cities around the globe to not only divest from fossil fuels, but invest in climate solutions that build jobs and resilience. Divestment, once viewed as a violation of fiduciary duty, is now being driven by investors as a matter of fiduciary duty. Financial regulators are crystal clear that climate change and the threat of stranded assets pose a threat to investor value here and now. Fiduciaries have a legal obligation to manage that risk through divestment and other strategies. The fossil fuel industry was once the backbone of the global economy, but it is now underperforming and it is volatile. For the past 5 years, the fossil fuel sector has underperformed almost every other industry globally. The shift is structural and it is one way. Investors are on notice that the days when the fossil fuel companies delivered strong and reliable returns are over. Fiduciary risk is also deepening as the result of the proliferation and escalation of climate lawsuits around the world seeking to hold the industry to account for its decades of deceit and delay. More than 1,000 such suits have been filed to date. Divestment, once viewed as merely symbolic, is starting to have a material impact on the fossil fuel industry. Companies like Shell now note divestment as a material threat to their business with the potential to impact stock price and limit access to capital. Industry trade groups like the Independent Petroleum Association are funding anti-divestment campaigns and reports. Listen, when the fossil fuel industry finds it necessary to sow disinformation on divestment, as it has for decades on climate change, it is under threat. Among the most significant and related new trends is also that some banks and insurance companies are not only divesting, but they're starting to enact policies to stop financing and insurance for new fossil fuel projects. In other words, they're starting to pull their core business from the fossil fuel industry. For example, the World Bank last year said it would no longer bankroll upstream oil and gas. AXA, the world's second biggest insurer in the world, has said that it will no longer underwrite coal and tar sands projects. Other banks and insurance companies are following suit, and if this were scaled, it could truly pose an existential threat to the industry. Without insurance, without financing, the industry hits a wall. At the same time that divestment is being embraced by the financial community, those that first led the movement, the doctors, the faith leaders, the students, the activists, the philanthropists, they continue to advance and win divestment commitments on ethical grounds. In the face of climate change's growing toll on human health and wellness, doctors are divesting. Just this summer, the American Medical Association, the Australian Medical Students Association, and the Royal College General Practitioners all committed to divest. Doctors are truly unique in their ability to tell the human story of climate change, connecting the dots to each of us, our families, and our communities. Divestments from faith groups are also surging. Just last month, the Irish Bishops' Conference committed to divest, marking 138 new faith commitments since 2016. Museums are moving too, dropping fossil fuel companies' sponsorships in increasing numbers. Philanthropy also continues to lead. This summer, the Portuguese Gulbenkian Foundation, heir to one of the world's first oil fortunes, sold its oil business. The decision was reminiscent of that of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund in 2014. As Stephen Hines, the president of RBF, said at that time, if John D. Rockefeller were alive today, as an astute businessman looking to the future, he would divest and invest. University campaigns are also going strong. The UK welcomed 12 new commitments this year, bringing the total up to 68. While wins have plateaued somewhat in the United States, faculties, trustees, and students continue to advance vigorous campaigns. But divestment alone is not enough. We have to speed the adoption of clean, renewable energy. And today, investors across the board are increasingly marrying their commitments to divest with commitments to invest in climate solutions. In summary, ethical pressure from movement leaders is weakening the social legitimacy of the fossil fuel industry. At the same time, economists and analysts are tracking the declining fundamentals of an industry that has moved from market leader to market laggard. From stranded assets to market pressure from cleaner, cheaper alternatives, investors are on notice that they have a duty, a legal obligation to manage climate risks to their portfolios and are increasingly turning to divestment to manage that risk. If we are to maintain a livable planet and to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, the world must be fossil-free by 2050. This requires both aggressive action by governments, but also investors. The shift is underway, but we must speed it up. Every divestment decision is a signal to political leaders around the world that a mobilized constituency has their backs as they work to implement policies to stem the tide of the greatest challenge of our time. Thank you.